I still remember the day my sister first introduced Wade to the family. He was all confident swagger, broad shoulders, and an unrelenting smirk that managed to settle beneath every word he spoke. He dazzled my sister, Carla, with wild stories and a quick wit, but from the first dinner he shared with us, I sensed a certain cruel edge just underneath that flashy grin. My wife, Amelia, noticed it too. She said it showed in the way he answered questions about his past, always sounding like he was performing on a stage. But Carla was enthralled, and who was I to argue with my only sibling's newfound happiness? I expected that with time, Wade's roughness would fade, that maybe it was just nerves, but instead, it seemed to multiply the closer he got to the rest of us. Our father tried to break the ice one evening, asking about Wade's plans for the future, but Wade rolled his eyes and said the future was overrated and overhyped. My mother, determined to keep dinner civil, tried changing the subject, but the damage had already been done. Dad stared at his plate, and Carla twirled her spaghetti, looking embarrassed on Wade's behalf. My wife kept silent, focusing on cutting her pasta instead of looking up. Weeks turned into months, and Wade continued showing up at family gatherings. He cracked jokes that never landed, ridiculed smaller details like the color of my mother's curtains, or the fact that Dad still wrote paper checks. The rest of us tried to give Carla's new man the benefit of the doubt, but we were wearing thin. Amelia was usually patient, but something about Wade's condescending tone made her spine stiffen whenever he was in the room. She was polite on the surface, but I could see how forced her smile was whenever he tried to strike up conversation. It wasn't that my wife was immune to rudeness. She'd grown up learning how to handle unkind words with grace. She believed fiercely that people who brandished cruelty often masked some deep hurt. She'd lost her best friend, Lillian, in a car accident 3 years earlier, and that tragedy gave her a special kind of empathy toward people who acted out. When she and I first started dating, she'd told me about how she and Lillian had shared everything, even a little apartment in the city during their college years. Losing her best friend had nearly broken her, but she'd found a way to face that sorrow without letting it make her hard or bitter. I respected the way she treated others, no matter how they behaved. But Wade was different. He seemed to feed off insecurity and pounce on vulnerabilities. I tried to keep an eye out for potential explosions during dinners or holiday gatherings, but I always wound up just a step behind, especially once Wade learned the specifics of Amelia's grief. At first, I had no idea how he found out about her best friend's death. It must have been Carla inadvertently letting slip the painful details. Whatever the reason, Wade latched on and used it like a twisted game of cat and mouse. He poked fun at sadness, insinuating it was melodramatic to cry over someone who'd been gone so long. Amelia tried to ignore his remarks. She would leave the room or redirect the conversation to something mundane, like sports or the weather. My parents also jumped in, redirecting the talk whenever Wade's commentary got too close to crossing lines. Still, it festered. Wade seemed to find these cracks in our family dynamic that he could exploit. Carla's embarrassment over her boyfriend's behavior was never enough to make her leave him. She would just nudge him and say, "Stop, Wade," with a nervous laugh, or shoot him a pleading look that rarely worked. I think we all told ourselves that eventually Wade would see he was hurting people and back down. But I was wrong. He thrived on control and was an expert at sniffing out someone's weak points. One Sunday, while we were gathered at my parents' house for brunch, Wade turned to Amelia with a mocking grin. Carla sat beside him, cradling her coffee mug, looking resigned. Across the table, Dad was reading the newspaper and Mom was rinsing dishes at the sink. I glanced up just as Wade said, "So, Amelia, do you still cry over that friend of yours? What was her name again? Linda? Lisa?" Amelia froze, her lips parting in shock, but she refused to dignify his question with a response. I set my fork down, trying to keep an even tone, and told Wade to knock it off. My mother, hearing the tension in my voice, turned from the sink and gave Wade a sharp look. He shrugged as if we were overreacting. "Hey, she's got to learn to move on," he said. "It's depressing. People die, you know?" His words landed like a blade. I felt a flush of anger rise to my face. Carla's cheeks turned crimson and she opened her mouth, then shut it again. But Amelia took a breath and calmly stood. She said she wasn't feeling well and was going out for a walk. My mother tried to stop her, but she just gave a small wave and left. I wanted to follow, but I'd heard her unspoken message. She needed space. I turned to Wade and told him he was out of line. He just smirked. fiddling with his phone like he couldn't be bothered. A few days later, Carla called to apologize on Wade's behalf. I could tell she was drained. She said Wade had lost his mother early in life and that he had a strange coping mechanism for death. He's never handled grief like a normal person, she explained. I think mocking it is his way of ignoring his own trauma. I responded that empathy wasn't optional. It was a necessity for being part of our family. She promised she would talk to him again. I heard the tears in her voice, and I felt a pang of guilt for being so harsh with her. After all, she wasn't the one who'd made Amelia cry. But it was also clear that Carla was deeply entangled in Wade's grip and not sure how to get out. I managed to keep our distance from Wade for a few weeks, though we had to attend certain family events. He didn't try anything for a while. In fact, it almost looked like he was making an effort to be gentler. The next time we saw them, Wade brought a bottle of wine as a gift for my mother, jokingly calling it a peace offering. I caught a glimpse of hope in Carla's eyes, as if she believed he was trying to turn over a new leaf. But all it took was one question about Lillian, one small spark, to reignite that sharp malice in him. We were at my sister's new apartment, admiring the fresh paint job and the updated furniture. Wade was giving us a tour of the place, pointing out the artwork he'd picked out, a series of abstract prints that, in his words, symbolized life's constant swirl of chaos and futility. I felt my stomach knot at the negativity, but Carla just shrugged. We gathered in the living room for some drinks. My mother was flipping through a magazine, my father silently running his fingers over a small scratch on the coffee table, and my wife was perched on the edge of the sofa, sipping her tea with careful composure. In the lull of conversation, Wade abruptly turned toward Amelia and said, "Hey, so how did your friend die again? Car crash, right? Isn't it weird how fragile we are? One minute we're driving, the next we're lumps of meat. But hey, at least we get a funeral for closure, right?" He laughed in this hollow, scoffing way, and something inside me cracked. My wife's face paled, and I saw her knuckles turn white as she clenched the armrest. I was about to stand up and drag Wade outside to set him straight, but Amelia beat me to it. She stood slowly, and her voice trembled with fury as she addressed him. "You think you're the only one who's lost somebody? You think it makes you strong to belittle other people's pain? You're the most disliked person in this family, Wade. Everybody here can barely stand you, and if you were a decent human being, you'd realize that you're pushing us all away." Her outburst reverberated through the silent room. Nobody moved. Carla's mouth dropped open, and Wade stared, stunned. My mother blinked, shutting the magazine, and my father looked relieved that Amelia had spoken the words we'd all been thinking. Wade tried to recover, crossing his arms, letting out a short chuckle that sounded forced, but Amelia wasn't finished. "You want to know why everyone here is quiet around you? It's because we can't wait for you to leave. You're toxic. You've made everything revolve around your twisted sense of humor. Well, guess what? We're done." Carla pressed her hands to her mouth. I could see tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Wade opened his mouth to retort, but Amelia spun on her heel and walked out. The door slammed behind her, rattling the picture frames on the wall. I could barely breathe, torn between comforting Carla and running after my wife. My mother cleared her throat and said, "I think we should all take a moment." Wade snorted, grabbed his keys, and stormed out without a word. Carla stood there, tears silently slipping down her cheeks. A week passed before Carla reached out to me, summoning me to meet her at a cafe near my workplace. She spoke in a tight, controlled voice when she asked me to come alone. I was surprised not to hear from Wade, but I assumed he was still fuming about Amelia's confrontation. When I arrived, Carla looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. She clutched her coffee cup with both hands, swirling the liquid aimlessly. I sat across from her, letting the hum of the busy cafe fill the silence. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Wade wants a public apology from Amelia. He feels humiliated and says he won't come to any more family gatherings unless she apologizes in front of everyone." Her voice cracked slightly. "He says that if she doesn't, he's done with me. He said it's a matter of respect." I almost laughed at the absurdity. A public apology for him mocking her best friend's death? Are you serious? I let my disbelief hang in the air. Carla's eyes darted to the side. She was struggling, torn between her loyalty to Wade and her loyalty to our family. "He thinks Amelia was way out of line," she whispered. "He called her emotionally unstable and said that if she can't handle a little teasing, she shouldn't be around him at all." I felt my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to shout at Carla, "Why are you still with him?" But I knew it was more complicated than that. Sometimes people get caught in relationships that slowly drain them, bit by bit, until they don't recognize themselves. I took a long breath and responded as evenly as I could. Amelia won't apologize. She was finally standing up for herself, and for all of us. Wade is the one who owes her an apology. I think you know that, deep down. Carla's eyes brimmed with tears. She asked me, "Then what am I supposed to do? He's making me choose." I reached out, gently placing my hand on hers. You need to decide if you can live with someone who shows no remorse for causing so much pain. She lowered her head, and I recognized the weight of that dilemma. She'd invested over a year with Wade, and letting go meant facing heartbreak and a sense of failure. "I can't make that decision for you," I told her, "but you should know that our family loves you. We want you safe and happy." For a moment, it seemed like Carla might break down in front of me. Then she inhaled, wiped her tears, and said, "I need time to think. Wade's pressuring me, but I can't just fold." I offered a solemn nod, feeling a flicker of pride that she was contemplating doing what was right for herself, not just what Wade demanded. When I got home that night, Amelia was sitting on the couch, hunched over an old photo album. I recognized the pictures. She and Lillian, giggling at a party, blowing out birthday candles, hiking up a scenic trail. She didn't notice me at first. When she looked up, her eyes were red. "I'm sorry for losing it," she said softly. "I just got tired of letting him stomp all over us." I pulled her into a hug and told her not to apologize, that I was proud of how she finally spoke her truth. She gazed at the photograph of Lillian in her wedding dress. "She would have told me to speak up a long time ago," Amelia whispered. A few days later, Carla summoned us all, my parents, Amelia, me, and Wade, to meet at my parents' house. She said she wanted to sort this situation out once and for all. I had no idea if she was planning on supporting Wade's demand for an apology or if she'd had a change of heart. The tension in our household was palpable as Amelia and I made our way to my childhood home. It was a cloudy day, and the wind tugged at the branches of the tall oak trees in the front yard. I gripped Amelia's hand, sensing her apprehension. Inside, the atmosphere was even heavier. My dad stood by the window with his hands in his pockets. My mom was seated on the couch, eyes pinned on Wade as he leaned against the fireplace mantel. Carla sat at the dining table, her posture rigid. We all took seats around the living room, forming a loose circle. Carla cleared her throat, her gaze flitting around. "I've asked you all here because I can't keep going like this. Wade feels he's owed an apology, and Amelia feels it's the other way around. So, can we please talk about this calmly?" Wade wasted no time, glaring at Amelia. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," he spat, crossing his arms. "I was making a joke, and you exploded. If you can't handle a harmless comment, that's on you." Amelia's eyes flashed with hurt. "Harmless?" she repeated. "You mocked my best friend's death. That's not harmless." Carla turned to Wade. Her voice was tremulous but resolute. "I asked you to come here to figure out if you can accept accountability for your words. Mocking Amelia's loss was cruel, and you've never once shown any remorse." Wade scoffed. "Why should I? She screamed at me. She said everyone in the family hates me." He looked around the room for support, but no one spoke.